Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today, I'm joined by author Renee Carlino to talk about her latest book, This Used to Be Us. This is a very exciting episode for me because Renee was actually the first guest I ever had on my podcast just over 2 years ago. So I'm very excited to reconnect with her today, catch up, and see what she's been working on since we last chatted. This episode was incredible. Not only did we talk about this book in depth, but we also talked a lot about her film background and her involvement in the adaptation of one of her books, Wish You Were Here, which is actually Julia Stiles' directorial debut. We also talked about the potential upcoming adaptation of my favorite book by her, Before We Were Strangers, and how she will also be working on adapting this latest book for the screen too. This conversation was really incredible, definitely something you can listen to prior to reading the book. So without further ado, my conversation with the incredibly sweet Renee Carlino starts right now. Welcome back, Renee, to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here. You are one of the few authors I have had return on the show, but what's very special about this chat is that you were also my very first author interview when I started this podcast like over 2 years ago now. So I'm very, very excited to have you back and to get to catch up and talk obviously about your new release. So welcome back. But firstly, how are you? How's everything going?
I am great. Everything's going well. Thank you for that. And I am very excited to be back as well, and very excited to see this podcast flourish and grow from the 2 years ago when you started. I appreciate your, not just because you liked my book, but because I appreciate your reviews and your opinions. And yeah, I'm excited to be back and to be talking about this book. It's been a while since I've had a book out. And I mean, I'm not counting the days or anything, but I'm actually not counting the days, but I've got like 2.5 weeks, I guess, before. No, it'll be 2 weeks tomorrow. Wait, is that right? Yes, 2 weeks tomorrow for the book, when the book is released. So it's been a while. It was 2019 when my last book was released this way. So building up to that, it's always a little bit, you see early reviews and you try not to read them, but it is what it is. The book is done. It's not going to change. So that's the hard part. But yeah, it's exciting. I'm glad people are, I'm glad that it will be in the world.
Yeah.
Because I wrote it a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the last time we connected, you were telling me that like you had just finished the first draft of this book and you were like, I don't know what it's going to be called. And like, it could change quite a bit because it's just the first draft, but like, it's so crazy that 2 years later, the book is like finished and it's now going to be in everyone's hands. So tell me a bit about like what the review process was kind of like for this book and getting it from when we last chatted, where you had finished that first draft until this finished version now.
Well, I hadn't sold the book yet. It was the first book since my first book that I had written a full manuscript for. So when we were talking, probably I didn't know where it would end up, where it would land, and if it would ever be published, if anyone would ever read it. I think at that point, my agent went out and pitched it to editors. I was so excited for Dial Press to pick it up because I love their like writing from the heart. I love that they are all about like feelings and even laughter, happiness, sadness, emotional, just everything. And also so much nonfiction that they publish for women and for mental health and everything. So I was really excited to land there. And yeah, it does take a while, but the first few books that I wrote, it was not as much of a strategic sort of publishing process as I think this is. And also the care that I was taking with not publishing the same book from another author, the same type of book from another author in the same month. And so there's, it's spread out a little bit. But yeah, in the time since I finished the first draft, I mean, it's had revisions, it's had chapters deleted and chapters added. And I think the whole beginning of the book was maybe in the third draft, maybe in the third round that I added the first 3 chapters. And so once that, once it it ends up being kind of what it is, then it's a whole process from there. I mean, it goes to copy editing, and then it goes to proofreading, and a lot of people read it, and then at that point they start creating arcs and sending those arcs out to reviewers and whatnot. And so I was excited to see some really good early reviews. I was nervous about that because you never know when you're writing if people even, there's times when I'm like, will anyone even understand what I'm trying to say here? Like, is this even like comprehensible? So, you realize like when your agent is like, yeah, no, we're going to sell this and we're going to try to sell it. Then, at that point, and like I said, there was some security in having finished it because once Dial, acquired it, they already knew what it was going to be. It wasn't,
Right.
I didn't have anything that I had to live up to. There was no expectations for me to write something like else. So that was a relief. But in that time, I've written a whole bunch of other things here and there, scripts and stuff, and also started a new book. And so I'm working on the new book now.
Okay. So many things to talk about. Obviously, you mentioned that you've been working on scripts. And I know that last time we chatted, you were really talking about like your film background, and we kind of bonded over my little bit of film background. And I know that at the time, Wish You Were Here was kind of like green lit, but nothing had happened. But I know that production has wrapped. So I'm wondering like how that experience was, how involved you were, if you were involved. I know that you have a really great working relationship with Julia Stiles, who's making her directorial debut. So like, I would love to hear a little bit more about that, whatever you're allowed to share, because I know things could get very tight-lipped around the film business.
They did an amazing, I've seen it, and I was absolutely just blown away. It's like it is such a testament to her experience and her sort of wisdom in that role. I was on set for a few days. I did see her working, but they shot the whole thing in New Jersey. I live in San Diego. So my role was really just the writing portion and pretty much that's it. There was a really funny like moment where I think that it was either the art director or the production designer asked me about the flags. There are these like little, at the restaurant she works at, there's these little flags that you have to like raise to get another drink or something, or if you want help from a waiter, server, or whatever. And it was from a restaurant that I worked at in LA called 4 and 20. If anybody remembers that and listens to this podcast, it was this sort of pie and fry like diner. A lot of people got their holiday pies there, but they had these little flags on the ends of the tables, and they've since closed, but all the servers, we would all stand in the side station and be like, oh my God, like that guy goes again raising the flag, and how ridiculous is it? The production designer asked me, I think it was, or the art director, he's like, what exactly? He's like, I'm having a hard time. Like, is this a real thing? Did this really exist? I'm like, yes. He did. I'm like, God, I wish I could go back. It was like the late night. I mean, it was like early 2000s. There's, no way I could. But I tried to describe it to him. And then what they ended up getting was like so much better than what it actually was. It's like this fun, like dings when it goes up. And so it's totally hysterical. There's a lot of funny moments in it. And Julia added a lot of lightness to it. But then really like at the end where it really hits home in the book, I think she really brought that she really brought that to life. I was very, very proud. I did not know what to expect. It's the first thing that I've written, first novel I've had adapted and made into a movie. So it was a big deal. And yeah, like I said, the acting I remember watching her sort of quietly go over to the actors and just kind of like talk to them a little bit. And then they would do the scene again. And then the way that it was all brought together, which I was kind of just thinking, what is going on here? But, I came in sort of in the middle of shooting, and I saw a great scene where Kelsey Grammer he plays the dad, and he's making pizza dough, and he's like singing in the kitchen. He's like singing this like pizza dough song. It's hilarious. It's just so light and like in those moments, and so much. I'm so glad that all of those elements were there in the film. So yeah, I'm excited. I don't know when it's coming out. It's slated for sometime in 2025. I think that the version that I saw I don't think that will be the final version. I think they still have some editing and I think like color correct or some sort of film. Like they're going to do a little bit of work to it, probably music too. There was music in it and it was great. And I couldn't even, was like to Julia, like, we share a brain. There is no way to put these. And then I showed her I'd sent her the playlist or whatever. I mean, so many of the artists were the same. Like, it was so much the mind space that I felt right back in that moment where I was writing the
Yeah.
novel in the beginning. And like, it was awesome.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And it must be so wild to like see this story that you wrote now be on the screen and having all of that film background and seeing how it was adapted. That must have been absolutely, I can't even imagine what kind of experience that must have been for you. But I know that we had also kind of touched upon the fact that maybe Before We Were Strangers was being adapted. Is there an update on that? Have you heard anything else on that front? I know you had adapted it like into a screenplay, right? That's kind of, I think, where yeah.
Still in the world being shopped around. I did have some interest in it just very recently. But I don't, that is maybe one thing that I probably have to be a little bit more tight-lipped about, but yeah, nothing is in production yet. And we did talk about how visual that book is
Mm.
and how there's such an aesthetic to it. And so not that it would be easy to make into a film, but that you can easily visualize how it could
Yes.
become a film.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope it does. I also really think that This Used to Be Us has a lot of sort of cinematic like moments in it. So
100%. I find
yeah.
that all of and I feel like it's because of your film background, but all of your books that I mean, I've read every single one, they all to me play out like a movie and I have no trouble visualizing it. And I just think that they would all be so incredible adapted to the screen. But I would obviously love to talk now about This Used to Be Us because I adored this book. I mean, I knew going into it what it would be about simply from our previous conversation and what you had explained like that first draft to be. But for those who have not yet read the book, what is this book about?
So this book is a sort of a modern like marriage story about a couple who they've been married for 22 years and they're sort of at the point in their relationship where they're getting a divorce and they're at that point where you just don't communicate nicely, properly, well at all. Like, just the breach of communication is completely so you read the first three chapters were added, which was sort of a flashback to when they
Mhm.
met, and just, kind of vignettes. Like, we're just kind of seeing the progression of the relationship with short little kind of like vignettes, and then it gets into like the present day, which is we've been married for 22 years. Our kids are almost teenagers. We're living in this house together, but we hate each other. The divorce has been filed. They're in mediation. And they decide to get a nesting apartment, which is an apartment that they share outside of the family home. The kids get to stay in the house, so you aren't shuffling the kids anywhere from mom or dad's house or whatever. So the kids get to stay in their own house, and then the parents kind of go back and forth from the apartment. So when Danielle is at the apartment, Alex is at the family home with the kids, and vice versa. So they have this space together, but they're never there at the same time, really. I mean, the idea is that they're just kind of going in and out. And I can tell you like a little personal, like just piece to this is that my
Mhm.
husband was working on a movie in LA and we live in San Diego. He's commuted a lot back and forth to LA. He's been doing this for 20 plus years. And he'll go on location a lot too. So we moved back from LA to be near our families because we had kids. But this movie was really intense. And so he got an apartment and I would go up there like periodically and, he wouldn't be there. I would just kind of go in and it was, so I've been with Anthony for 25 years. It was so odd. Like, I was like, who is this person? Like, this
Yeah.
is the dish soap you would buy if he weren't
Mhm.
married to me. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it was like a different person, but not in a bad way or in like, not in a creepy way, not in a bad way, not in a, sort of like unfaithful or dishonest way. It was
Yeah.
just literally like, and I started to see him differently. Like,
Mhm.
it's when you're in married for so long, you get into these like rituals, you kind of become, and I describe this in the book, how the two people sort of become the marriage identity. And
Mhm.
then it's hard to pull out and see and have autonomy in that and to see yourself again and or the other person
Mhm.
right from the other side of the street. And that's what I always say is that I think that it's important to sort of force yourself to see the other person, from the other side of the street again so that you can remember what it was. you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So is that kind of how the story came to you with like your experience having this other apartment and like seeing bits and pieces of your husband's life and like kind of drawing from that? Obviously, your circumstances are completely different, but in terms of like the actual inspiration behind the story or like that nugget, that light bulb that kind of went off and you're like, aha, this would be a good book. Like, what exactly was that?
I had already kind of started the process of developing the idea because I had a friend who had a nesting apartment. They did the same thing. They did
Okay.
that where they were going back and forth. I don't remember getting any details from her about her emotional feelings about
Hmm.
going in and out of the apartment. I just knew that they had rules about it.
Hmm.
So they had rules like they couldn't have dates there or whatever. They could both afford to get hotel rooms, so it was just like a non-factor. It was not like a whatever. But they were fully divorced in doing this, and like it kind of worked, and it almost forced them to communicate better. But so it started there, and then I was also there's this book. Oh my gosh, Meeting in Captivity, and I'm just totally blanking on her name, Esther Perel. So she has a TED talk too, and she talks about like your person can't be your everything. They can't be your lover, your confidant, your co-parent, they can't be your everything. They can't be your financial partner. They can't be it's just too much. Like back early, days where there was a village literally raising like your children. It was, you had everybody, you had these other social groups, you had, whether it
Hmm.
was like religion or whatever it was, but we find ourselves sort of relying on our partner to be our everything. You need to be my
Hmm.
therapist and also so I was taking that idea and I was kind of processing it in my head. And that's where the idea for the TV show that Danny kind of writes
Hmm.
comes from, even though I'd actually written a pilot about a similar, I'm going in a million different directions right now because I'm thinking about the point is that there are a lot of things that influence and inspire. Once an idea is in my head, for me, I'm sure other writers can relate to this. Once it's there, you can almost see it everywhere in
Hmm.
everything. Like once the idea, the inception happens, you're looking for it, but maybe not consciously, but you're sort of seeing it. It's like, uh,
Hmm.
my son wanted a certain type of car, and then we started seeing them everywhere. We're like, oh, there's another one. Look
Yeah.
at that. Like it's just
Yeah.
so that's sort of what happened. And I think I probably drew from a lot of different experiences.
So what's interesting about this book is it's definitely a love story, but it's a different kind of love story. And people are very quick to put a label on it and marriage in crisis or throw a trope on it or what have you. But it's so much more than a love story. It really is like a piece of women's fiction, I think, even though it is dual POV, which I would love to talk about a little bit. But what was your kind of like emotion or feeling going into this book, knowing you were writing something pretty different from what you've written in the past in terms of like the subject material?
Well, I wanted to shift and I wanted to be repositioned more into women's fiction, mainly because I was getting older and I wasn't relating. My relationship was changing.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't feel super confident. I wanted to write what I wanted to read at the
Yeah.
time. Um, and so I did that, and I knew that maybe I would lose some readers. That I'll read a lot of reviews, even about some of my older books, are like no spice at all. Like, what's going on in here? And so I'm like, well, there never really was, but I'm older now, so I'm going to write older characters, and it doesn't necessarily fit into that like new adult sort of
Right.
contemporary romance genre necessarily. But I think that like if you've read Before We're Strangers, you can see so many parallel, and actually a lot of my books with the sort of chances and life being too short and like just the way we treat each other and our partner and family dynamics and everything. It's in those stories, but they were much earlier in their
Yeah.
relationships, so I got to write more about you know the exciting, the really passionate sort of early years or whatever in some of those relationships. And where are these people now? Where are they after 22 years? What does it look like? Some are
Hmm.
happy. Some, I could probably
Yeah.
look back at them and decide which characters are happy and which characters aren't. But yeah, this couple, they had a total loss of communication, and that is a theme in most of my books, is the
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about in writing this book, because it's dual POV, was it hard for you, given that the story is like it's so heavy and it's so heartbreaking and like it really is so like real and very raw. Was it hard for you to kind of get into both of those characters' heads and show like equal like sympathy or empathy for both characters? Like how was that in getting into each of their headspaces, being the person that's like actually making the story up and writing the story and deciding how it goes?
So the way that I thought about this book was that, had I written first person from the female's perspective, it would have been very biased toward that, protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted the audience to feel the same way about both characters. I wanted the marriage to be the main character in the book, so that we're fighting for the marriage. We're not fighting necessarily for Danielle or Alex or their views about what happened to their marriage, but we're fighting for the marriage. So that's how I looked at it from the very beginning. And as far as getting into the mind of a man,
Mm-hmm.
I've been with one for a long time. Um, but just, you think about the things that they say and you go, is that the way that they think I'm thinking?
Yeah.
So I remember, like one of the first scenes where Alex is like, I really hate her. Like, he's saying it inside of his head, but he's behaving in a certain way that's sort of just more like stonewalling. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's not necessarily saying, Danny, I'm really upset with you, I'm really mad at you, I'm really hurt by you. And this is like I feel like a typical thing in a marriage that's falling apart, is sort of this stonewalling, and I've just given up and nothing I say seems to matter. And it's Danielle that how much that aggravates her and how much more she becomes sort of, you know, um, until she starts to leave when he does actually,
Mm-hmm.
that last day when she's kind of taking the stuff out, where he's like, hold on, because he's going, oh, what's happening? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is this really happening?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't hard for me to get into, but like I said, I didn't want the audience to side with Danielle. And I felt like had I written it from just her perspective, it would have been, well, and also I wouldn't be able to show what he was thinking. I wouldn't be able to, we would only
Yeah.
see the actions, which would be almost nothing because he literally doesn't say anything hardly at all, so.
Yeah. And I love going back kind of to the whole concept of like the nesting apartment and how it really was used as like a storytelling technique to give us little like flashbacks or vignettes from other points of the story, whether it was past or present, just from the other person's perspective. Like, what was that like writing those moments? And also like the music piece to it, obviously, in those old records. Like, that was a very cool way I found to kind of tie in old memories. And I know a lot of people associate music to moments, and a song takes you right back to a certain moment. So tell me about that kind of whole storytelling technique that you like.
I always kind of knew that. Thank you, by the way. A lot. Many of my books are like rich with musical references and things.
Yeah.
But I remember reading somewhere, and I always knew this. I just never had words or anything to put it there. I didn't know this was a fact. That like music and smells are the things that evoke your memories the most, right? So just familiar smells, the smell of your grandmother's kitchen, of chocolate chip cookies being baked or whatever it is. And then the music. And I can remember so vividly driving in the car, and we were going up to Big Bear. We were driving in California up a mountain to where there was snow. And my mom was really into Whitney Houston and my dad was really into Bob Marley. And they had one tape. My dad had Kaya and my mom had the one that all the children one. I don't even know what that one. I think it was their first album maybe. But and they both played them over and over and over. And every time I hear a song from either one of those albums, I'm like right back in that. We had like a blue station wagon. It was like
Wow.
total, like family trip.
Yeah.
And then, so when I needed a device to be able to justify going back in time, and that's where it came from. And then, after I started writing it, I'm like, damn, I wish I would have done this. Like, I wish I would have done this my whole life, right? Like, that would be so cool to sort of
Yeah.
document because certain songs, you're like, oh yeah, when I met my husband or whatever, like, oh, I remember we listened to that song all the time. And so for your audience, what Danielle does and what has been sort of a tradition in her family is to write what's going on in the moment that the record is playing. So if the record, and they have this, this vast sort of eclectic record collection. So a song would be playing and she would go and write what was happening on the white album sleeve on the inside, so that when you pulled the record out 10 years later, you would see her notes about it. And the one where they're like fixing up their old house when they're first married was really like poignant, because I totally remember doing that with my husband. We bought our first house, we were fixing it up, and I totally remember not that the whole scene, but like I remember the music and being outside, and I know it gets a little racy, but but it was it was very, it made sense for her to do that. And so she would write things like, Alex is outside building garden boxes for me or whatever. And that's what she says. Or, Noah took his first steps or whatever it is. And these kind of not pivotal, but these poignant moments in their life that she would document this way, like a diary. And then, when they sort of abandoned that, like we do sometimes, like people who journal, like I didn't journal for 5 years and then I started again. She takes the record collection to the apartment, and then they both, while they're alone, sort of revisit these memories.
Yes. So, and it was such like a nice way to get a glimpse into their history, but without it being with it being very subtle and very meaningful. And I just was like, I mean, I know you've gotten this before. And when your publicist reached out to me and was like, do you want to talk to Renee? I'm like, yes, of course I do. But in the pitch, it said something like, get your tissues. Like I was freaking blubbering throughout this entire book. Like I just felt so like sad yet hopeful the entire time. And I'm freshly married. I'm like not even 6 months into my marriage, but like I can very much understand, and like seeing my parents married for like 30 years, like understand just how like life gets like mundane and your day to day is just your day to day, and you get like so used to each other. And like I can see how this scenario between like Alex and Danny, like I can see how this is how their life turned out and why this is where they're at in this relationship. But even when it was like so bitter between them, there was still some hint to me as a reader, and I don't know if this was intentional for you or not, and then knowing how this book ends, like there always was this like glimmer of hope. And like it just was, I was just so sad the entire time reading it, and like felt so heartbroken the entire time. And I was like, I hope that there's going to be like some reasoning for this. Like, I just hope that I'm not reading this like sad, heartbreaking marriage falling apart story, and that there's like no point to it in the end. And I like had full faith that you would take me on this journey for a reason. But when I got to the last 15% of this book, 20% of this book, I was like on the edge of my seat. Like I have no even like words, like thinking, I mean, I read it yesterday because I wanted it to be so fresh in my mind, but I was not well. And without like spoiling it for those who haven't read it, I would love to know like what your experience was writing the end of this book. And was it like cathartic and in any way? Was it emotional? Were you dreading writing it, knowing you knew how it was going to end? Like, or was it a relief? Like, I need to know what your headspace was in wrapping up this story.
Yes, I feel like my experience is very much like the reader's experience. And I'm not just saying this because there's this great quote where it's like, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. And it's really, you do have to connect to what you're writing if you want your readers to connect to it. And I was a blubbering fool at the end of the book too. Like I knew it was coming, but it was the words and the way that they were talking about each other. And I like what you said about there was hope, because that was intentional for sure. It's just like in that first couple of pages where he says, I mean, I really hate her guts, but I can't imagine a world without her. Like I can't, but you can't really hate someone without really caring. You know what I mean? If you really, really don't like them, don't hate them or anything, you just move on. So they needed that too. And though they were complacent and at times, like I said, stonewalling and no communication, they were still inside their heads going, what is he doing? What is she doing? Where are they at? So they were caring. They just weren't showing it. So that is a good that's a good example of why I needed to write it from both their points of view. You know, show that.
And were you like dreading this ending? Were you like happy to write it? Like, were you like, this is the perfect ending? Like, tell me about your decision in how you wrap the story up without, I guess, giving away too
I
much.
felt there was a point where it started feeling flat, and it wasn't. I didn't use that as a device. I knew it was going to happen. I just knew that it was time.
Mm,
And because one of the things is life is short. Like,
mm,
don't waste your time fighting with the people that you love. Love the people. You love your people well. Just do that. It will make your life better. And so I was. I didn't want the book to end because I really had an easy time writing it. Like, it was
mm,
flowing well, and I enjoy the process of writing so much that I've said this to people, and they're like, that can't be true. But it is absolutely true. If someone paid me to write in a closet for the rest of my life and no one ever read it, I would be happy. Like, it's not that I do want to make readers feel, but I still really just love sitting down and being like, hee hee. And like my husband will come home and I'll be like, oh my God, listen to like what I wrote. And then I'll start crying while I'm describing it. And he's like, you're so weird that you're crying over something you made up. It's really alive.
yeah.
And I really enjoy that. It's a piece that I sometimes have to remind myself of, because it's easy to procrastinate with
Mhm.
writing and kind of get into that writer's block phase. But to remind myself that it isn't a job. I really did this before anyone knew. My whole life I was doing this.
Right.
So um, that's what I have to remind myself of, that I enjoy
Yeah.
it, because once I get back and like I'm in this book now and I'll start writing a lot of words a day,
Mhm.
like it's such a good feeling at the end. After you cry at the end of the book, even though it doesn't feel like it for a while, there is some sort of like renewal.
Mhm.
At least when I read another book that I didn't write and where I'm crying at the end, even though it's like it hurts and it's just uncomfortable, and you're crying and your face is swollen. There's something after where I feel like renewed.
Yes, yes. 100%. So you just said that this book was like relatively easy for you to write. Like, I guess it just flowed out of you. But looking back on the entire experience, was there like a moment or a scene that you were either one, dreading, or two, you thought it would be easy, but it ended up being hard to write? Because it's actually surprising to me, knowing how heavy this book is, that it was so easy for you to execute onto a page.
I had a hard time, but it ends up being one of my favorite scenes. But I had a hard time writing the Thanksgiving scene and trying to make it not seem fake,
Mm,
or like that would never happen. Like how are these two people in the same room and behaving this way and sort of getting each other's backs in a weird way, but not.
yeah.
And also, I had a really hard time with um, with Kate and making that seem realistic.
Yeah.
I hope that I did. I mean, I hope that it's somewhat realistic. I didn't, but those exchanges between the parents, the
Yeah.
sister's fiance, and Kate, and trying to explain what that feels like when you introduce this new person into this really solidified family dynamic that's existed for many, many years, and the new person is super awkward and not to her, like, she's a great person. That was a hard thing
Mm,
to do, was to make sure that the audience still liked her and
yeah.
didn't go, oh, she sucks, because that would be too on the nose. It would just be perfect. Oh no,
Right.
she's done for her. But for her to just be enough to where she sort of sucks the life out of the room, and you go, oh, this person is not working with our machine that has been.
Yeah.
So that quote where Danny says, like, we're his family, separated, divorced, or dead, we're his family. Like, it's true. It's
Yeah.
true to a degree. And I know that kids who are children of divorce would love for their parents to be able to be in the same room and to be cordial and nice to each other. And I know that a lot of people are. And I know a lot
Hmm.
of people aren't too. So
Hmm. So overall, now that the book, I mean, once this episode goes live, like the book will be out there, what are you hoping audiences take with them before going into the story? before reading it? What are you hoping that's something that they kind of are aware of?
I think that it's important to see that for a reader, I think that there's an easy answer to something they don't like in a story. Like, why did she have to do that? But you have to think of the alternative. What if I didn't do that? And I think you know what I'm talking about. So, and even with the Kate situation, like, why did she have to? Because they need to see. They've been wondering what's on the other side of the fence this whole time. They need to see what's out there. Like, and it just would not be realistic if they weren't wondering after all these years of hating each other and him thinking that she had this affair with this TV guy and da da da.
Yeah.
And so, even though romance readers, especially, and I am the biggest romance lover and reader, have a hard time with certain themes that are actually like things that happen in marriages and stuff. So, but because we want to escape that, we want to get into the fantasy of how love can be perfect.
Right.
So I think that's what I want people to go into it knowing, is that it's not perfect, and that, people aren't. I've read a review where the reviewer said, I really disliked them in the beginning because they were so mean to each other. And then I would have given it 5 stars if they weren't so mean to each other in the beginning. And I was like, well, they have to have an arc. Like, change. I wanted you to dislike them in the beginning. I would never have written the words that I wrote if I didn't want the reader to sort of just, they're terrible words. They're like really awful to each other. They're at that point where they don't have any filter. She especially doesn't have any filter. He's sort of just awful in his mind. And so that's what I want readers to go into, and then just give it a chance. And to remember that the themes of the book, and that most of the decisions that I made in writing the book was because I wanted to stay aligned with the themes,
So now obviously this book is going to be out there. I don't want to be like greedy and be like, what are you doing next? But I have to ask, like, what are you working on next? I know you mentioned you're doing some screen stuff as well. So is there anything you could share with everyone who's listening?
Well, I'm going to adapt This Used to Be Us, but because I do think that, and like we were talking before about there being so many scenes that are cinematic, like in my mind, that I think would really play out well on the screen. But yeah, I'm writing a new book, and it's not unlike the books that I've written before, but it's different. The characters are a little bit younger than these characters. It really is a book about what I love about the younger generations is that they really care about figuring out their brains and their actions, and like much more introspective than I feel like my generation and the generations before me. And maybe because of Instagram and social media. And once you get on the algorithm of somebody giving you some, psychology advice, all of a sudden you have all the advice in the world. But I really my main character is a psychologist, and she's dealing with something that's just totally unexpected and in her relationship. And it's not anything I don't think people will think of right now off the top of their heads, but it's sort of like this challenge to a marriage. Can a couple overcome the worst possible thing happening to them? And so that's the main theme of the book. But yeah, I'm having fun writing it because the husband he's sort of a tech scientist, and I just love I love nerding out on that all day long and just researching it. So much fun.
Oh my.
Yes, I love researching. I love that's why I've tried to give them like unique jobs. Like most of my characters have different jobs because I want to do that.
Yes.
I want to be that person who takes the picture. Like he's part of the team that took the first picture of a black hole. Like that happened. It was like this team at MIT, and there was all these different people like working on this, and it was like all these people came together and made that happen. And so I was like, oh, what if I was involved in that? And then I get to like just research it until forever.
Yeah.
So yes, that's the part I really love. I really love that part too. And
amazing. I'm very, very excited to read your next book. And obviously, fingers crossed for all these adaptations. I can't wait to see more of these stories come to life on the screen. I mean, I know that they're going to be incredible. I mean, I've loved every single one of your books, but seeing it come to life in that way, I'm so, so, so excited. And I really can't wait. And I know everyone else will be very excited as well.
Yeah, I am. It's a lot of people have asked, like, are you nervous that, that you won't like it? And I really wasn't when I first saw Wish You Were Here. I didn't have any expectations either way. It is what it is, and that's how it's going to exist. And so, with that in mind and having worked around the film business a lot and knowing it's a really different animal, like it's
Yeah,
not, you have no control over, there's a lot of hands in it. But I trusted Julia like implicitly, and I knew that she would do something cool with it. So I'm really happy about that.
amazing.
Um, yeah.
Very exciting. Okay. Well, thank you so, so, so much for taking the time to chat. I'm very excited for everyone to read this book and to hear what everyone else thinks. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of people messaging you saying, oh my God, I was awake all night sobbing because that was kind of how I was last night. At one point, my husband was like, are you okay? I'd been silent for like hours. He's like, are you okay? And I was like,
Oh my God.
no. He's like, what the hell? I'm like, don't ask. I can't even. So thank you for that. But no, really, I'm sure everyone's going to adore it. And it's a story that I'm sure will stay with everyone as it's, I'm sure, going to stay with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Right.
much for being a reader and being loving books and sharing your love of books. I really, it's the only way, is that if people are talking about books and not not so much about Instagram reels, though I love a good
You love a
reel
good
session.
reel. Love that.